Marcus had always been the type of soldier who believed in showing dominance through physical strength. At 28, he stood 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and arms that looked like tree trunks. His face carried permanent scowl lines, and his voice boomed across any room he entered. For 3 years, he had been part of the elite Special Forces unit, and he made sure everyone knew it. The training facility buzzed with activity that Tuesday morning. 250 of the country's finest Special Forces soldiers had gathered for the annual joint training exercise. This wasn't just any ordinary military gathering. These men and women represented the cream of the crop, each having survived brutal selection processes that broke most candidates before they even reached the halfway point. Marcus strutted through the main corridor, his combat boots creating thunderous echoes against the polished concrete floor. Other soldiers stepped aside as he passed, some out of respect, others out of fear. He had built his reputation on being the guy nobody wanted to mess with. His fists had settled more disputes than his words ever could. "Watch where you're going," Marcus barked at a younger soldier who accidentally bumped into him while carrying equipment. The kid couldn't have been more than 22, fresh-faced and eager to prove himself among the veterans. "Sorry, sir," the young soldier stammered, quickly gathering his scattered gear. Marcus grabbed the boy's collar, pulling him closer. "Sorry doesn't cut it in the real world, rookie. Maybe you need a lesson in respect." His grip tightened, and several soldiers nearby began to gather, sensing trouble brewing. That's when she appeared. Lieutenant Sarah Chen moved through the crowd like water flowing around rocks. At first glance, she didn't look like much. Standing barely 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing maybe 120 pounds, she seemed almost delicate compared to the mountain of muscle that was Marcus. Her black hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her uniform was pressed to perfection. But her eyes told a different story. They were dark, focused, and completely calm. She had the kind of stillness that came from years of discipline and training that went far beyond what most people could imagine. "Let him go," Sarah said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Marcus turned his head slowly, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "And who exactly are you to tell me what to do, sweetheart?" The way he said sweetheart dripped with condescension and mockery. "Someone who's asking nicely," Sarah replied, her hands relaxed at her sides. "This is your first warning." The crowd around them began to grow. Word was spreading quickly through the facility that something interesting was about to happen. Soldiers stopped their conversations and training exercises, drawn by the electric tension in the air. Marcus released the young soldier's collar and turned to face Sarah fully. His massive frame cast a shadow over her smaller figure, but she didn't flinch or step back even an inch. If anything, she seemed to become even more still, like a coiled spring waiting for the right moment. "First warning?" Marcus laughed loudly, the sound echoing off the walls. "Lady, do you have any idea who you're talking to? I could bench press 3 of you without breaking a sweat." "I'm sure you could," Sarah acknowledged with a slight nod. "But that's not really the point, is it?" Marcus looked around at the growing crowd of spectators. This was exactly the kind of audience he loved. These were his peers, his fellow warriors, and he was about to show them why he was someone to be feared and respected. He cracked his knuckles slowly, each pop sounding like a small gunshot in the tense silence. "You know what? I like you," Marcus said, his voice taking on a mock-friendly tone. "You've got spirit. Most people would have walked away by now. But spirit only gets you so far when you're dealing with someone like me." Sarah's expression didn't change. "Are you done talking?" The question hit Marcus like a slap. Nobody spoke to him like that. Nobody dismissed him so casually. His face darkened, and the fake friendliness vanished completely. "You want to do this the hard way? Fine by me." Marcus began rolling up his sleeves, revealing arms covered in scars from various missions and training accidents. Each scar had a story, and each story ended with Marcus being the last man standing. The crowd pressed closer, forming a loose circle around the two figures. Soldiers whispered among themselves, placing informal bets on how long the small woman would last against the giant. Most gave her less than 10 seconds before she'd be on the ground. But there were a few in the crowd who knew better. These were soldiers who had heard whispers about Sarah Chan, rumors about her background that seemed too incredible to be true. They watched with different expressions, mixtures of anticipation and concern. Colonel Williams pushed through the crowd, having heard about the commotion from his office across the facility. He was a seasoned officer who had seen more than his share of conflicts, both on foreign battlefields and in military barracks. He knew that sometimes these situations needed to play out naturally rather than being stopped by authority. "Give them some room," Williams ordered quietly to the soldiers nearest him. "But be ready to intervene if this gets out of hand." Marcus heard the colonel's words and felt even more confident. Even the brass wanted to see this show. He flexed his fingers and took a step closer to Sarah, using his height advantage to loom over her menacingly. "Last chance to walk away, little girl," Marcus growled. "I'd hate to have to explain to your commanding officer why you ended up in the medical bay on your first day here." Sarah finally moved, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of backing away or raising her hands defensively, she simply adjusted her stance slightly. Her feet shifted maybe 6 inches, her weight redistributed almost imperceptibly. To most observers, it looked like she had barely moved at all. But, to those who knew what to look for, it was like watching a master artist pick up a brush. "I appreciate your concern," Sarah said, her voice still maddeningly calm. "But I think you're the one who should be worried about the medical bay." That was the final straw for Marcus. Nobody, absolutely nobody, threatened him in front of his peers. With a roar of rage, he drew back his right hand, fingers curled into a fist the size of a small ham. Every muscle in his arm and shoulder coiled like a spring, ready to unleash 3 years of special forces training and a lifetime of street fighting experience. The crowd held its breath. Cameras on phones began recording. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the collision between unstoppable force and immovable object. Marcus's fist shot forward like a cannonball, aimed directly at Sarah's face. His punch carried enough force to knock out a horse, delivered with the speed and precision that had made him legendary among his unit. In his mind, this fight was already over. Sarah moved. But what happened next would be talked about in military circles for years to come, analyzed and studied by combat instructors around the world. In the space of perhaps 2 seconds, everything everyone thought they knew about fighting was turned upside down. The massive training hall fell completely silent except for the sound of Marcus's heavy breathing and the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. 250 elite soldiers watched with wide eyes, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. And Sarah Chan stood exactly where she had been standing before, completely unchanged, while Marcus lay unconscious on the floor at her feet. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Marcus lay crumpled on the polished concrete floor, his massive frame looking strangely small and vulnerable. His chest rose and fell in the steady rhythm of deep unconsciousness, but otherwise, he was completely still. A thin trickle of blood ran from his nose, the only visible sign of what had just occurred. Sarah stood over him, her breathing completely normal, not even the slightest hint of exertion on her face. She looked down at the unconscious man with an expression that might have been disappointment, as if she had been hoping for more of a challenge. Colonel Williams was the first to break the stunned silence. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, pushing through the crowd to get a better look. He knelt beside Marcus, checking his pulse and breathing. "Get a medic over here, now." The spell was broken. Soldiers began talking all at once, their voices creating a buzz of excitement and disbelief that filled the massive training hall. Some pulled out their phones, frantically reviewing the footage they had captured, trying to understand exactly what they had witnessed. "Did you see that? How did she move so fast? I blinked and missed it. Who the hell is this woman?" Dr. Patricia Gonzalez, the base medical officer, arrived within minutes, her team carrying a stretcher and emergency medical kit. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who had seen every type of training injury imaginable during her 15 years of military service. "What happened here?" she asked Colonel Williams while her team began their examination of Marcus. "Hand-to-hand combat demonstration that went a little further than expected," Williams replied carefully. He wasn't entirely sure himself what had just happened, and he needed time to process the situation before making any official reports. Dr. Gonzalez checked Marcus's pupils with a small flashlight, tested his reflexes, and examined the small amount of blood coming from his nose. No obvious signs of serious trauma, she announced to the crowd. Pupils are responsive, breathing is normal, pulse is strong. Looks like he's just unconscious. We'll take him to the medical bay for a full evaluation. As the medical team carefully loaded Marcus onto the stretcher, Sarah finally moved from her position. She walked over to the young soldier who had been the original victim of Marcus's bullying, the kid who had accidentally bumped into the larger man and started this entire chain of events. "You okay?" she asked quietly. The young soldier nodded rapidly, his eyes wide with amazement and gratitude. "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you, ma'am." "I mean, what did you?" "Just be more careful next time," Sarah said with a slight smile. "And don't let people like that push you around. You're here because you earned it, same as everyone else." Colonel Williams approached Sarah as the medical team carried Marcus away. The crowd was beginning to disperse, but many soldiers lingered, still trying to make sense of what they had witnessed. Williams had questions, and he suspected the answers were going to be very interesting. "Lieutenant Chen, isn't it?" Williams said, extending his hand. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Colonel Williams, Facility Commander." Sarah shook his hand with a firm, professional grip. "Pleasure to meet you, sir. I hope this incident won't cause any problems with the training schedule." Williams laughed despite himself. "Problems with the training schedule? Lieutenant, I think we need to have a conversation about exactly who you are and where you came from." "My office, 10 minutes. "Of course, sir." As Sarah walked away, Williams noticed something interesting. Several of the soldiers who had witnessed the incident were now looking at her with expressions of recognition rather than confusion. These weren't random soldiers, he realized. They were members of special units, people who dealt with classified operations and worked in the shadows of the military world. Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran of multiple deployments in hostile territories, approached the colonel. "Sir, with your permission, I think I might be able to provide some context about Lieutenant Chen." "Go ahead, Sergeant." Rodriguez lowered his voice, glancing around to make sure they wouldn't be overheard. "Sir, I've heard rumors about her. Word is she's not regular military. There's talk that she's part of a program that officially doesn't exist. Deep cover operations, specialized training that goes way beyond what we do here." Williams raised an eyebrow. "What kind of specialized training?" "The kind that teaches you how to neutralize a threat in seconds without leaving any obvious evidence of how you did it," Rodriguez replied. "The kind they use when they need someone who can walk into a room full of enemies and walk back out without anyone noticing anything happened." Colonel Williams had been in the military for 26 years. He had commanded special forces units, worked with intelligence agencies, and been briefed on operations that would never appear in any official records. He knew that there were programs and capabilities that existed in the gray areas between different branches of government and military service. "Interesting theory, Sergeant. Let's keep this conversation between us for now." "Understood, sir." 10 minutes later, Sarah knocked on Colonel Williams's office door. The room was sparse but functional, with military decorations covering one wall and a large map of current global conflict zones dominating another. Williams gestured for her to take a seat across from his desk. "Coffee?" Williams offered, pouring himself a cup from a machine in the corner. "No thank you, sir." Williams settled into his chair and studied Sarah carefully. Up close, he could see details that hadn't been apparent during the incident in the training hall. Her hands showed calluses in unusual places, the kind that came from weapons training that went far beyond standard military firearms. Her posture was perfect, but it wasn't the rigid formality of someone trying to impress a superior officer. It was the natural stillness of someone who was always ready for action. "So, Lieutenant Chen," Williams began, "your service record makes for interesting reading. multiple deployments, commendations for actions that are classified above my clearance level, and training certifications in areas I've never heard of. I serve where I'm needed, sir. That's what I figured. Williams leaned back in his chair. The thing is, what happened out there today is going to generate a lot of talk. 250 elite soldiers just watched you take down someone who could probably bench press a small car. That's not the kind of thing that stays quiet. Sarah nodded. I understand your concern, sir. I tried to resolve the situation without violence, but he forced the issue. Oh, I'm not concerned about your actions, Williams clarified. Marcus has been a problem for a while. Too aggressive, too quick to use force when diplomacy would work better. If anything, you probably did us all a favor. What I'm concerned about is maintaining operational security. Operational security regarding what, sir? Williams smiled. Come on, Lieutenant. We both know you're not here for standard joint training exercises. Nobody develops the kind of skills you just demonstrated by going through regular special forces training. So the question is, what's your real mission here? For the first time since their conversation began, Sarah's expression shifted slightly. It was subtle, but Williams caught it. A slight tightening around her eyes, a barely perceptible change in her posture. She was making a decision about how much to reveal. I'm here to evaluate readiness levels and training effectiveness for a classified program, Sarah said finally. What happened today was not part of my mission parameters, but sometimes situations develop that require immediate response. And this classified program, does it have anything to do with the rumors I've been hearing about experimental training methods and enhanced combat capabilities? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing her words carefully. Colonel, with all due respect, there are aspects of my assignment that I cannot discuss, even with facility commanders. What I can tell you is that my presence here poses no threat to your soldiers or your operations. Williams nodded slowly. He had expected as much. In his experience, the most interesting military operations were always the ones that officially didn't exist. Fair enough, he said. But I need to know one thing. Are we going to have any more incidents like what happened today? Not unless someone else decides to force a confrontation, Sarah replied. I prefer to avoid unnecessary attention. Good. Because whether you realize it or not, you've just become the most famous person on this base. Every soldier here is going to want to know your story, and some of them are going to want to test themselves against you. Sarah's expression suggested this was exactly what she had been hoping to avoid. I'll handle any future situations appropriately, sir. I'm sure you will. Williams stood up, indicating the meeting was over. Lieutenant, one last thing. Whatever program you're really part of, whoever you really work for, just remember that the soldiers here are good people doing important work. They deserve respect, even when they're being idiots like Marcus was today. Understood, sir. That's exactly why I stepped in. As Sarah left his office, Colonel Williams sat back down and stared at the closed door. In 26 years of military service, he had never seen anything quite like what had happened in the training hall. He had a feeling that Lieutenant Sarah Chen was going to make the next few days very interesting indeed. Meanwhile, word about the incident was spreading throughout the facility faster than wildfire. Soldiers were gathering in small groups, sharing their recordings of the event and trying to piece together exactly what they had witnessed. The name Sarah Chen was being whispered in every corner of the base. And, somewhere in the medical bay, Marcus was slowly beginning to wake up, with no memory of what had happened and a lot of questions about why his head hurt so much. Marcus woke up 3 hours later with the worst headache of his life. The medical bay was quiet except for the soft hum of monitoring equipment and the distant sounds of training exercises continuing throughout the facility. His vision was blurry at first, but gradually the white ceiling tiles came into focus above him. Welcome back to the land of the living, Dr. Gonzalez said, checking his chart on a tablet. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck, Marcus groaned, trying to sit up. His head spun, and he immediately lay back down. What happened? Last thing I remember was, there was some woman. You had an encounter with Lieutenant Chen, Dr. Gonzalez said carefully. You've been unconscious for about 3 hours. No signs of serious injury, but you've got a mild concussion. The memories came flooding back slowly. The young soldier, the crowd gathering, the small woman who had dared to challenge him. Marcus remembered throwing his punch, remembered putting all his strength behind it, but after that everything was blank. She sucker punched me, Marcus said angrily, trying again to sit up despite his dizziness. I'll file charges against her for assault. Dr. Gonzalez raised an eyebrow. Marcus, I've seen the video footage. You threw the first punch. She was defending herself. Video footage? Half the base has recordings of what happened. You've become quite famous in the last few hours. Dr. Gonzalez pulled up something on her tablet and turned it toward Marcus. Want to see? Marcus watched the video in stunned silence. He saw himself drawing back his fist, saw the massive punch he threw with all his strength and training behind it. But what happened next defied everything he thought he knew about fighting. Sarah didn't dodge his punch or block it in any conventional way. Instead, she moved with a fluidity that seemed almost impossible. Her left hand came up in a motion so fast it was barely visible on the recording, making contact with his wrist at precisely the right moment and angled to redirect his own momentum against him. Simultaneously, her right hand struck a specific point on his neck with surgical precision. The entire sequence took less than 2 seconds. Marcus's own punch, combined with Sarah's redirection, sent him spinning sideways while her strike to his pressure point shut down his nervous system like flipping a light switch. He was unconscious before he hit the ground. How is that even possible? Marcus whispered, watching the footage again. That's what everyone's been asking, Dr. Gonzalez said. The interesting part is that she barely used any force at all. Your own momentum did most of the work. She just guided it. Marcus stared at the screen, his military training trying to process what he was seeing. He had been in dozens of fights over the years, both in training and in real combat situations. He understood leverage, momentum, pressure points, and every other aspect of hand-to-hand combat that the military taught. But this was something entirely different. Who is she? He asked. That's the question everyone's trying to answer. Meanwhile, across the facility, Sarah was discovering that avoiding attention was no longer an option. Word about the incident had spread beyond the base through social media and military communication networks. Videos of the encounter were being shared and analyzed by combat experts around the world. Her secure phone rang as she was reviewing training schedules in her temporary quarters. The number that appeared on the screen made her stomach tighten. Her handler never called during daylight hours unless something had gone seriously wrong. Chen here, she answered on the second ring. Sarah, we have a problem, came the familiar voice of Director Morrison, the man who had recruited her into the program 7 years ago. Your cover is blown. Videos of your demonstration today are trending on military networks worldwide. I had to intervene, sir. The situation was escalating beyond acceptable parameters. I understand that, and I don't blame you for taking action. But we're getting inquiries from intelligence agencies in 12 different countries. Everyone wants to know who you are and what program trained you. Sarah closed her eyes and rubbed her temples. She had known this day would come eventually. The skills she possessed were too unusual, too effective to remain hidden forever in the modern world of smartphones and social media. What are my orders, sir? Pack your gear. We're extracting you tonight. The helicopter will be there at 2,300 hours. And the mission here? Consider it complete. You've gathered more intelligence about readiness levels and training effectiveness in 1 day than we expected to get in 3 weeks. After the call ended, Sarah sat in her small room and considered the implications. The program that had created her was one of the most classified projects in military history. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, it was responsible for training operatives capable of accomplishing missions that were impossible through conventional means. She had been recruited at 19, fresh out of basic training but already showing exceptional potential in combat evaluations. For 7 years, she had undergone training that combined ancient martial arts techniques with modern scientific understanding of human physiology and psychology. The result was a level of fighting ability that seemed almost supernatural to those who hadn't studied the underlying principles. But the program came with a price. The operatives it created could never have normal military careers. They were too valuable for conventional assignments and too dangerous for routine deployment. They existed in the shadows, appearing only when situations required capabilities that regular forces couldn't provide. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Sergeant Rodriguez, the veteran she had noticed watching her with recognition during the incident earlier. "Lieutenant Chen? I was wondering if I could have a word with you." Sarah stepped aside to let him enter, then closed the door behind him. Rodriguez looked nervous, as if he was struggling with how to begin the conversation. "Sergeant, what can I do for you?" "Ma'am, I need to tell you something. I think I know who you are. Or rather, what you are." Rodriguez took a deep breath. 3 years ago, I was part of a rescue operation in Eastern Europe. A diplomat's daughter had been kidnapped by a criminal organization with military training and heavy weapons. Sarah remained silent, but she knew where this story was going. We had intelligence that she was being held in a fortified compound with at least 20 armed guards. Our mission was to provide perimeter support while a specialist went in to extract the target. Rodriguez paused, studying her face. The specialist was a small Asian woman who moved like nothing I'd ever seen before. "That's an interesting story, Sergeant. She went into that compound alone and came out 20 minutes later with the diplomat's daughter. 20 armed men, and not a single shot was fired. When we asked our commanding officer what happened to the guards, he just said they were all unconscious and would wake up in a few hours with headaches." Sarah walked to the window and looked out at the training facility where soldiers were still going about their evening routines. Many of them kept glancing toward her building, clearly hoping to catch another glimpse of the mysterious woman who had taken down their toughest fighter. "The woman in your story sounds very skilled," Sarah said neutrally. She was. But what impressed me most wasn't her fighting ability. It was her restraint. She could have killed every one of those men without breaking a sweat, but she chose not to. She did exactly what was necessary to complete the mission without causing permanent harm to anyone. Rodriguez moved to stand beside her at the window. "That's what I saw today when you dealt with Marcus. You weren't trying to hurt him. You were just stopping him in the most efficient way possible." Sarah turned to look at the veteran sergeant. "What's your point, Rodriguez?" "My point is that I wanted to thank you for saving that girl 3 years ago, and for stepping in today when that kid was being bullied. Whatever program you're part of, whatever organization trained you, they did something right." For the first time in hours, Sarah smiled genuinely. "Thank you, Sergeant. That means more than you know." After Rodriguez left, Sarah began packing her gear as ordered. She had one more task to complete before her extraction. Marcus deserved an explanation, or at least as much of one as she could provide. She found him in the medical bay, sitting up in bed and looking much more alert than he had earlier. Dr. Gonzalez had cleared the room to give them privacy, though Sarah suspected several soldiers were listening from the corridor outside. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked, pulling up a chair beside his bed. Like an idiot, Marcus replied honestly. "I've been watching that video over and over, trying to figure out what you did to me. I redirected your energy and applied pressure to a specific nerve cluster on your neck. It's a technique that causes temporary unconsciousness without permanent damage." Marcus laughed bitterly. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple, once you understand the underlying principles. But it takes years of training to execute properly." "Years of what kind of training?" "Because that wasn't anything they taught us in Special Forces school." Sarah considered how much she could reveal. "Let's just say I had access to some unconventional education opportunities." Marcus studied her face, seeing something there that made him ask his next question more quietly. "Are you even really military? I mean, regular military?" I serve my country, Marcus. That's what matters. But, not in the way the rest of us do. No, Sarah admitted. Not in the way the rest of you do. Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing this confirmation of what he had already begun to suspect. Look, I owe you an apology. I was being an ass to that kid, and you called me on it. I should have backed down instead of trying to prove something. We all make mistakes. The important thing is learning from them. Yeah, well, this is one hell of a learning experience. Marcus gestured at the bandage on his head. Mind if I ask you something? Go ahead. How many people like you are there? Sarah stood up, indicating their conversation was over. Fewer than you might think, and more than you'd hope. As she reached the door, Marcus called after her. Hey, Chen? She turned back. Next time someone raises their hand against you, maybe give them a chance to reconsider before you end it in seconds. Sarah smiled. I'll keep that in mind. 3 hours later, an unmarked helicopter landed quietly on the far side of the training facility. Sarah climbed aboard without ceremony, carrying only a small duffel bag. As the aircraft lifted off into the night sky, she looked down at the lights of the base below. Tomorrow, the soldiers would wake up to find that Lieutenant Sarah Chen had been reassigned without notice. The official story would be that she had been called away for classified duties. The truth was more complicated. Somewhere in the darkness below, Marcus was probably still awake, thinking about what had happened and wondering who she really was. In a few days, when the excitement died down, most of the soldiers would go back to their normal routines. But they would all remember the day they witnessed something extraordinary. And, in military facilities around the world, training instructors would begin incorporating new techniques into their curricula, based on carefully studied footage of a 2-second encounter that had changed everything they thought they knew about combat. The program would continue, and Sarah would continue to serve in the shadows, appearing only when conventional forces weren't enough. But, for one brief moment, she had stepped into the light, and the world had gotten a glimpse of what was possible when skill, training, and restraint came together in perfect harmony.